Things I thought would make me free. While people halfway around the world, they've been fighting and dying and bleeding. Now it seems that they're gonna be. There's a new world coming. Everything gonna be turning over. Everything gonna be turning over. Where you gonna be standing when it comes? You know the book, the Bible. You read it and you see it will surely come to pass. This is how it's gonna be. Those that were weak and humble would come and gain the earth. Them that shuddered at the bottom would rise and rule the world. There's a new world coming. Everything gonna be turning over. Everything gonna be turning over. Where you gonna be standing when it comes? The nations of Asia and Africa, they're taking over their lives. To sisters and brothers south of us, oh, finally getting wise. Then take a look, United States of the North American clime. Your strange mixture of wealth and hate, you won't be exempt this time. There's a new world coming. Everything is turning over. Everything be turning over. Where you gonna be standing when it comes? There's a new world coming. Everything gonna be turning over. Everything gonna be turning over. Where you gonna be standing? Where you gonna be standing? Where you gonna be standing when it comes? There's a new day coming.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our speaker, Adrienne Maree Brown, who is here to talk about her book, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds. We're going to begin with a land acknowledgement.
We want to begin our time together today with a land and people acknowledgement. We honor and pay our respects to the land on which we stand and its traditional stewards, the Anishinaabe, the Council of the Three Fires, which include Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, also known as Ottawa, Chippewa, and Potawatomi tribes. We also acknowledge the people of African descent who were forcibly removed from their land and separated from their families through the enslavement Holocaust, and pay reverence and respect to them for building this country's infrastructure and economy with no compensation or reparations to date.
Thank you. I want to introduce Kama here. Kama and I share a courage, and thinking about what I want to say about Kama, I feel like Kama and I share a courage to act for the world we believe is possible, and a determination to honor ourselves and one another in the process. I will keep going because I see you over there doing that too. Kama makes me feel like we can walk together and feel less alone, carry some of the tools and food in our packs that we need on the road. She is the founder and executive director of Rooted. Kalamazoo Enrichment Center offers healing arts and birth work programs that are diverse, inclusive, anti-racist, and trauma-informed. Her work exemplifies her dedication to justice for all, beginning with birth. And Kim and I found each other because our children, who are now 19, Went to preschool together.
I didn't write anything.
That's okay.
Jenny's middle name is Joy, and that's exactly what she exemplifies. Since I've met her 15 years ago, that's all I think about when I think of Jenny. What is your title here? VP of Learning and Engagement at the Kalamazoo Nature Center. She supports a dedicated team in offering education and experiences that build connections to nature and pathways to learn to protect our natural world. In her role, she is focused on the recently unveiled priorities of developing the institution into one that is made of and led by our diverse community to build pathways to engage in solutions to the climate crisis. That's a nice title.
Well, thank you. I want to talk a little bit about, I want to set the tone for why we're here. We have gathered together, and by we, I mean a whole collection of folks that you saw on your screen when, as we came together, the Kalamazoo Nature Center, One Place of KPL, Rooted, the Black and Brown Therapy Collective, Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition, the Arcus Center for Social Justice, and the Mary Jane Stryker Underwood Center for Civic Engagement, both of Kalamazoo College, Griffin Place, the Kalamazoo Public Library, Open Roads, ROC, which is Read and Write Kalamazoo, TRHT, Truth and Racial Healing, Redbirth Green, Western Michigan University, and the YWCA. This series emerged out of first being gifted, I was gifted the book Emergent Strategy. And I started talking with people about it because it felt like such a homey way of thinking about it hit me home, it hit me in the heart. And I started talking to other folks about it, and I heard from so many people that connected to it also. And this was like before COVID, y'all, and we like stewed and came together and kept connecting on how we might bring Adrienne Maree Brown to Kalamazoo to help Kalamazoo think about what emergent strategy looks like here. And that's what we're hoping for. And from the perspective of the Kalamazoo Nature Center, I think one of the things that we grapple with as an institution is we have long been rooted in thinking about the science of our environment and how that needs to guide our actions. And what we're asking for with this series is for, I look at it like this: I trust in the science to help me learn more about how we need to move in order to solve the climate crisis. And there are all these other solutions and all these other problems. And there's a commonness where if I work to address the climate crisis with the information I have, and you're working to address hunger or injustice or help the unhoused or literacy or education, there are commonness between those things where the solutions to your work are going to help the solutions to our work. And we are going to be able to transition into a world that is able to survive better together. So that is why we are here. Thank you. Mm-hmm. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Adrienne Maree Brown. Adrienne Maree Brown is the writer in residence at the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute and author of Grievers, the first novella in a trilogy, on Dawn Imprint, and also Holding Change, the way emergent strategy, facilitation, and mediation. We will not cancel us and other dreams of transformative justice.
Pleasure activism, the politics of feeling good, emergent strategy, shaping change, shaping worlds, and the co-editor of Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction from Social Justice Movements and How to Get Stupid White Men Out of Office. She is the co-host of How to Survive the End of the World, Octavia's Parables, and Emergent Strategy podcasts. I first heard of Adrienne Maree Brown when Arcus Center for Social Justice Leadership had a book signing, and she came into Kalamazoo, and I've been standing ever since. I stand. Emergent Strategy, as a lifelong animist, Emergent Strategy allowed me to look at being in relationship to all the wonders of the world and nature in an even more in-depth way. And not, like Jenny said, surviving. How do we thrive now? How do we move from surviving this world into thriving? That's why I am here. I want especially people of color to be able to thrive together. At this time, we would love for Adrienne Maree Brown to bring us all together in a grounding. Are you ready for that? Awesome.
Hi. So I'm just going to ask all of you to really put yourself in relationship to gravity. And you can do that in whatever way feels right for your body. But I want you to notice that you are not floating up into space and you are not bumping against the ceiling, but you are actually held by gravity all the time without ever having to ask for it, which means you're always grounded. Technically, you're always grounded, right? And you might be distracted or energized or something else, but it's just a point of remembering, oh, gravity is still holding me right here in place. So it might help to close your eyes. It might help to deepen your breath. I notice that when I slow my breath down, it's easier for me to feel the heaviness of myself. And then we want to give our body something sweet, something good, something delightful, right? So your body will tell you what that is. So listen right now. Is there a stretch? Is there a shift? Is there a movement? Is there a body roll? Is there a deepening of the breath? Or maybe there's a signal, you're thirsty, you're hungry, right? Just listen for that. Body wisdom, body knowing. And if you can go ahead and make the adjustment, make that shift, make that move, make it, right? Stretch that body, lift yourself up, open yourself wide. Roll around your hips, especially if you've been sitting. See if you need to rock back and forth. Give your spine a little dance, a little treat. And if it's something you can't do in this moment, make a promise to yourself. Before the day is done, I'll attend to that. I'll water myself. I'll nourish myself. And just notice your body believes that promise. Right? Always, every day is a chance to be building trust between yourself and your base nature, your primal nature. And the last little bit is, these are heavy times. These are complex times, chaotic times. Just notice if there's anything in your system right now that's like, that's too heavy to carry. It's too heavy for me. And trying to drag it along is distracting me. It's exhausting me. And if you can let it drop, it can drop through you, down the long legs, down your long bones, down through the legs, down through the feet. It can drop that way straight into the earth with gratitude. She's got it. Gravity's got it. It can be held. Or if you need to visualize it, if you're like, it's on my shoulders, I don't want to take it in and through, I need to just push it off. Just lift it up off your shoulders, lift it up off your head, lift it up off your heart, and set it down. And again, with gratitude, this is too heavy for me. I need rest. I need a break. A spiritual rest, a physical rest. I'm putting this down. I'll carry what I can carry. That's all we can do. Take a deep breath in. Let it out. If you feel some lighter energy, right? Notice that. Take a deep breath in. If you can't put anything down, notice that, right? Notice that. Oh, what is that attachment? What is that? Just be curious, non-judgmental. Take another deep breath in. Breathe it out all the way down the body, through the feet. Gratitude to the earth. Say thank you, thank you, thank you. And here we are.
Thank you for that. That is good for me to slow down. I want to give a little, some more gratitude to a handful of folks. I would like to lend some gratitude to one place who is supporting us right now in making this virtual event function well for us, along with supporting us in thinking about how to make it meaningful for our community. And then also the Terry Todd Speaker Fund, which is an international speaker fund that's actually supported by a family in our community who works really hard to live into the way they believe the world should be. And that's a fund that is in honor of Terry Todd, who is the mother and grandmother of that family. And then I want to thank the Nature Center for trusting me to be who I am in this role, and allowing me to do some different things here, and for continuing to show some growing openness to learning from our community how we need to show up. Thank you, and thank you for being here. I look forward to hearing from you and learning from you in this moment that we're sharing together.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stacy Jackson, and I'm part of the One Place team, and just wanted to transparently check in on tech. We're having some issues with people getting into the space, and so what we're going to ask is if any of you are in the same office space and can share the sound and the audio and the video, that would be fantastic. If you can't, we understand, but just wanted to make that ask just in case. And thank you for that very much. Pass it back to Jenny and Kama. Thank you.
And then lastly, I want to let you all know who are with us virtually that we have 3 watch party locations. One is at the Nature Center where we are, but in a different room. One is with Asia, and Asia Smith is a student from Kalamazoo College who graduated last year, who has supported the organization of this series and is hosting a watch party at Kalamazoo College with the community there. And then Denise Keel and Sibel Shattuck, who are hosting a watch party at Western Michigan University. And we will all be talking more about what the experience we have together virtually. We'll be continuing the discussion afterwards together in our spaces. Thank you. Hey, Adrienne Marie Brown, thank you for being here. I look forward to hearing you. Handing it over to you.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
If you want to just give everyone a quick overview, I can't assume that everybody read Emergent Strategy, but I would hope that they have, and I will also ask that the community gets on board. But I know at this point you're pretty succinct in explaining what Emergent Strategy is, the tenets of it. We'll start there.
I would say the main thing I think is important to understand about Emergent Strategy is it's getting in right relationship with change, and getting ourselves compatible with the planet, like being like, how do we be compatible with the planet, which includes with each other? There's like principles and elements of it. So the elements of it are being adaptive with intention, like not just flailing about changing, reacting, but really thinking about the world you're trying to create and how the adaptations serve that. Being fractally oriented, like paying attention to the small and the pattern, being nonlinear and iterative. So recognizing the change doesn't happen in linear ways. So it happens because of what we practice, and our practices accumulate. So we want to be practicing and experimenting and accumulating the skills that we actually need to survive. It is decentralized and interdependent. So how we relate to each other should never be, putting one person on a pedestal or one person at the top of everything, but really figuring out how do we decentralize vision, decentralize work, decentralize even inspiration, and how do we be interdependent, which I think coming through the pandemic, a lot of us have had a lot of practice in giving and receiving help, support, aid, love, care, food. It is resilient, and transformative justice right now, I think, is the way that humans practice resilience. So we are wired to recover from harm and recover when we lose things. Like there's a certain amount of suffering and loss that is part of the human experience, part of the cycle of life. And we are resilient. We are meant to recover from those things. And transformative justice is a way we get to the root of like what harms are happening in our community. How do we recover? And then the last piece is creating more possibilities. So rather than that sort of capitalist narrowing framework, like there's only one way, which I just heard this quote from an Ojibwe ancestor named Walter Brissett was shared with me yesterday, that the most European idea that we uphold is that there's one big way to do everything. And it made me feel very pleased, because I was like, okay, good, because creating more possibilities is what I think is the way, which is there's lots and lots and lots of necessary experiments and necessary paths and necessary ways of doing things. And each of us is divergent. Each of us is distinct. Each of us has particular ways that are unique to only us. So those are kind of the elements of emergent strategy. And I think there's so many people who've practiced emergent strategy throughout time and space. I'm always looking back through history and being like, I see you, Emil Carcabral, like just like looking and being like excited by, I think that as a displaced, a person of displaced ancestry. So I'm a mixed race Black woman who doesn't know much on either side of my family about where the lineage goes back to. There's a way that I am rooting myself spiritually and emotionally into a lineage, right? That I'm like, there's something original, there's something at the level of instruction that some Indigenous communities still have that continuous line to, but many of us have lost the line, lost the thread, lost the way. And I think emergent strategy is also that. I think it's also a way of like trying to hook back onto that original architecture for loving and caring and being in community and being on earth. So it resonates, when people say like, oh, I knew this. I'm like, yes, I think we all know this. I don't argue with people about it, because I'm like, it's not, I didn't make it up, I observed it, that this is the operating system of our natural world, and we are nature, and we are currently dysfunctional, but we can be more functional. So that's what's happening.
Thank you. How's my sound? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay. So one of the things that sticks out for me, and I went for nature is a safe space for me. And it's a spot where I was talking with a friend and somebody I admire a lot recently about what happens in your brain differently when you walk in nature alone. Yeah. And we came to that it's a space where you can be with your thoughts uninterrupted. And even when someone else is walking next to you, it still you're still conscious of this presence and pressure. So
Mhm.
for me, it's a space where like what really is in there can emerge
Yeah.
in whatever form it is. So I went for a walk this morning to try and think about what is it that we're really looking for. And from the start to finish of this, like thinking about this series, because COVID gave us a lot of time to think about why it's meaningful to Kalamazoo, which is nice. And it changed all along the way for all of us.
It emerged.
It emerged.
Yeah.
And it gave me a lot of
Yeah.
to like have conversations with people locally.
Yeah.
And that's where I want to draw in like what's relevant here, because we want to think about how emergent strategy can help us be a community that is listening this morning, you said, how can we be a nature-informed city or a nature-based city? And I just want to read some of the questions that came from other people to me about this series and ask your thoughts about them. Pick the one that hits you.
Okay.
I'm just going to read them in a list. So questions and comments. You know when you know, and the right things will come, with some encouragement. Who are your teachers? And I should clarify these questions. A lot of these questions come from the other events we have held in the series that are from other leaders in our community. I don't understand the connectedness of emergent strategy with climate science. Who do you want to be in this work? My favorite R is relinquishment. The unhoused are our leaders in surviving with less. Who are you doing this for? Do you know if this is the right support? Who needs to listen? If you cannot offer what we need, we will find another way. How will you lead this to action? Nature is a space we need to heal from centuries of injustice and trauma. This is why we need each other, to keep going, to see clearly. Remember to share the load, to see beauty in the remains. I would just love to hear what popped out for you and talk to us about that.
Well, I loved, there's this interplay of this question that I felt like was coming up a number of ways, which is who are your teachers and who is this for? And I feel like it's the mutuality of those things stood out to me a lot. And some of the answers were in here: unhoused leaders, I think incarcerated people, indigenous people who are still connected, who are still in that line of practice, are some of my teachers and some of the who it's for, right? So I feel like my teachers, a lot of them I name, a lot of them are people that have written and I've named them, like, I'm just like, actually, I can show you. I think I can get this to turn. Over here is my ancestor wall, ancestor altar. And so I can show you. So Grace Lee Boggs is here. She's one of my teachers. Octavia is here. We have Nina Simone. We have Aretha Franklin, Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison, Malcolm X, Frida, Maya Angelou, Prince, Marilyn Monroe, my friend David Blair. I'm like moving my finger. Berta Cáceres, who is an incredible organizer who was murdered, climate organizer who was murdered a few years ago. Shirley Chisholm, Harriet Tubman, Shango. So I feel like there's the reason I wanted to show them, because I feel like these are people who were refugees, fugitives, runaways, houseless, homeless, enslaved peoples. They were addicts. They were considered difficult. They were considered crazy. And they're the ones, right? They're the ones who are like, oh, after society rejected me in some way, I was able to actually connect with my humanity. And I think that there's something important about that for all of us, that is trying to fit into a societal structure that is actually meant to break the entire experience of belonging will just break you over and over and over again. But once you recognize, once you're out of it, so for some of us, when I was queer, I was like, I'm out of it. Like I don't fit into this system. And I love that. Now I'm grateful for it, because I think the sooner you recognize, I don't think any of us fit into this system, actually. I think all of us have to break and contort something to get into it. And so then emergent strategy for me is a way of understanding all of us who are like, there's a larger system that we're actually accountable to. There's something more mysterious, more complex, and more interesting that we're all actually a part of. And how do we get in there? And I think a lot about what is the listening we have to do. So in some way, people ask me this actually about emergent strategy all the time. Is it like, who is it targeted? Is it just for Black people? Who is it for? And I felt like I learned from Octavia E. Butler, who this whole area is all Octavia stuff here. She's always on my shoulder. But Octavia, one of the things she taught us was you never know who you're going to be in the apocalypse with. And you need to be developing a system of understanding everything that can be rooted in your Blackness or rooted in your identity, your origin of identity, but it also needs to be able to speak to all of humanity, because most of the identities that we've been given were constructed by someone who wanted to have power over us. And so there are necessarily limited identities. And what we are constantly trying to do is reclaim our whole complex humanity, the fluidity, the spectrum, the magic, the part of ourselves that can't be contained or understood at a glance. And we're trying to reclaim that. And the part of us that's changing all the time. I feel like I meet people all the time and we're like, dang, when I became a mom, people thought that I wasn't able to do anything else, and they're like, but I can do even more. I'm a superhero now or whatever. So figuring that piece out is like, how do I reclaim more of myself? And I think particularly for marginalized identities, this is so important. This is like everything. And I think of it as reclaiming our biodiversity, right? That the healthiest ecosystems in nature, in nature beyond humans, are the ones where they're the most biodiverse, the most multitude of ways of being can coexist and be in symbiotic relationships with each other. And that's considered a healthy ecosystem, with lots of mycelial conversations happening. And in our human ecosystem, we have tried to reduce diversity, reduce divergence, reduce any ways of being different, usually in punitive and violent ways. And so like in a large way, emergent strategy is for every single human being to figure out how to be the biodiverse element that you are in relationship with all the others. And I think there's room for anyone who can figure out how to live without causing a ton of harm to other people, and not just the natural, like, humans rub up against each other, there's suffering, there's loss, that's part of our experience, but that next level where there's an intentional harm or unintentional and perpetual harm, there's ways of like, how do I get awakened to that and stop causing that harm? There was also a question inside of this that I was interested in about emergent strategy and climate science. And, I always get nervous when people are like, science. I'm like, I don't really know. I'm not a full scientist, but what I do believe is that the earth is an emergent communicator. And I think that the earth is finding ways to communicate to us right now. I actually think that COVID is a communication device. Like, as much as it is something that is causing us immense grief and loss and fear and terror, I also think that there's something being communicated. And this first occurred to me in that first 3-month period when everything shut down around the world for a moment. And it was like, oh, look what's happening to the air quality. Look what's happening to the oceans. Look what's happening to the earth. And then we keep trying to go back to normal. And then we bring back up all the dangers. And every time we go back to normal, there's a variant that emerges. I think that's interesting, right? Because maybe the only language we can hear is our own mortality, like maybe the only thing that could actually shake us enough to be like, you seriously, like it's no longer being trickling down to the next generation, which unfortunately overall our species seems to be okay with being like, someone in the future will deal with that. We're taking everything now, and y'all will go find another planet or something. I don't know. Unfortunately, too many humans think that way. We don't sit in that 7 generation before and beyond us awareness, which is an indigenous world. That is one of the ways that indigenous people understand or understand our place in the cycle of time, right? So if you don't have that, if you're just thinking about now, then you need something that's going to challenge your now. And I feel like COVID has come and been like, okay, I'll challenge your now. And we're finding adaptations inside of that. But I also think that what's happening in the climate is communication. And I think if we look at it as a language, then it's like, there's a language of hurricanes, there's a language of wildfires, there's a language of floods, there's a language of drought. And usually by the time it's at the crisis point, that's the scream. That's when it's like, I am screaming at you. But if we were paying attention, there's the tiny first signs of this happening. And I think right now is a time when we're like, oh, how do we all learn the signs so that we don't end up in that screaming match with the earth where she's screaming at us to change and we are screaming, get back to normal. So I think that's how it connects, is fundamentally emergent strategists are trying to create more possibilities. And that includes more possibilities for how humans can live on the earth, even though if we're listening to climate scientists, we understand that this is about to be a hell of a time. And I want to point to a resource that I love, which is there's a group called Movement Generation. I always try to uplift their work. They're in Emergent Strategy. There's an essay from them about how change actually happens. But they also have amazing resources that help people understand the lag, right? So that we are like, I think it's 40 years. There's like a 40-year lag from what goes out into the environment and when those, all the consequences of that actually come to bear. So if we're in this 40-year lag, it's 2021. So it's thinking about what was happening with technology in 1981. That's what we're experiencing right now in terms of the impact, the climate, the warming, the way life feels day to day. I call it this the golden age of global warming, because for most of us, it's like, it's kind of balmy. I don't know. The winters are a little gentler. I don't know. But it's also still global warming, which we see in the intensity of the storms. The fact that a hurricane that was slated as this is going to hit New Orleans created mass flooding in New Jersey and New York. It's different. Things are changing. So, I think that covered some stuff. Science.
I realize we didn't acknowledge the chat community. If you have something coming up, this is an open conversation with Adrienne. And if you drop it in the chat, we might ask her. We're not going to ask her to respond.
Yeah,
it's relevant.
I can't follow the chat, but y'all can follow it.
Absolutely. For me, I would like to ask this random question.
Okay.
Emergent strategy leans into decolonization for me. It feels like a way to decolonize our way of being.
Yes.
Someone recently said to me, decolonization can blur the line to dysfunction. And I would just like to know what you think about that.
Well, one of the beautiful tricks of white sociopathy is that, if you have been socialized into a situation where you believe that the way that you do things is the right way, and it's an urgent, fast way, and it's all about systems and structures, then it's going to feel very dysfunctional to make a transition to other ways of doing things. And I've definitely experienced this. I was definitely socialized in that white sociopathy move, right? And I'm using that language intentionally. I want to invite you all to use it with me. My friend Makani Timba hit me to this, and I was like, "Whoo!" Instead of saying white and supremacy together, which is a spell that we cast that keeps whipping them together when it's not true. She was like, we need to call it what it is, which is white sociopathy. It's a sociopath way of thinking that you are superior and that everything exists to serve you. And that your way is the way that needs to be upheld and centered. I was like, she blew my mind. I was like, okay, I'm changing it immediately, got it. And I can feel in my system that I'm not casting that spell anymore. That I'm not bought in, that's decolonization for me. But part of it is recognizing that it feels uncomfortable. And when I experienced it as a facilitator, it was really time-based. So I was like, I only have an hour with you and we have 5 minutes per section, and nothing can happen in 5 minutes. Nothing can happen in an hour. How am I going to do change or life? And I had to learn to listen into the body, which has a different pace, and be in relationship to what is the pace of this work? What is the actual pace of this work? And then the next question that emerges for me always with that is then, if I'm moving at the pace of this work, what is the right next step? And one step, an hour meeting could be perfect for one step, right? We're going to take this one move forward. It's often not perfect for the amount of work that we are socialized to think we can fit into that amount of time. The other thing I'll say is a lot of it is us, we're terrified of the fall of capitalism. And I think we're feeling anticipatory grief about the fact that this system of convenience, it's like super convenient. We think of convenience as functional. And that's because it's very short-sighted, right? We're just thinking about what is available to me right this second. I need it and I have it. We think that's functional. But if you zoom out and it's like, what is the impact of that convenience? So who was the essential worker who had to risk their life to give me that convenience? What is the name of the tree that had to sacrifice itself so that a new box could be made, so that this could be shipped to me and this box will hopefully be recycled? Do we trust these programs? I don't know. Who was the person who had to get that oil out of the ground and get that oil into the cars and the trucks that made it be able to quickly be everywhere, right? When you start to zoom out, what is the impact of this convenient thing? Suddenly it's dysfunctional in a longer time view, even if it seems functional in the short term. So those are some of my thoughts, right? It's like, there's a different way of being and it's going to feel different and it might feel dysfunctional. The other thing I want to say, which is the trick of it all, is I am now in multiple work communities, which don't feel like work communities. They feel like joy and pleasure and learning communities. And we have shifted so that we're moving at a human pace. And what that means is, when one of us loses someone, we pause, we slow down the work, we take room, we shift when we feel like a shift is needed. And so sometimes that's like, oh, we were doing the work this way and now it needs to be done this way and we're going to change. We can feel it and we just make the change. We're so much more functional than I've never worked this well before. And it's because the people are actually aligned. No one is overriding themselves to keep pushing. In those systems that seem highly functional, there's almost always a Black or brown woman or a woman where it's functional because of that person sacrificing everything. And so, you just have to say it, but I'm like, everyone's like, oh, it's working so great. And it's because it's Linda. Linda's why it's working so great. Linda is the glue and the follow-up and she cleans up everything after everyone. And Linda is the reason. And, raise your inward hand if you know that you have been that Linda, right? Like I have been that person where I'm like, y'all think this is functional, but if I got sick tomorrow, I don't even feel like I can get sick tomorrow because then nothing would work, right? That's not functional. That's not actually functional. So the decolonizing process is one that talks about how do we actually share the labor that it takes for us to live, and how do we be in relationship with everything that it takes for us to live. And I don't want to pretend like it seems so great to me. I still order things online. You know, there's still stuff that I'm like, we just put in a garden and we're like, okay, so eventually we're going to be able to like eat most of our vegetables out of this garden instead of ordering them, you know, delivered to us or whatever. And we'll see how that goes, right? But because it's like neither of us were socialized towards growing our own food, but as we decolonize, we're like, obviously everyone needs to grow at least some of your own food. The other thing, let me see if I can pull this all together. It feels kind of new, but the functionality is also about scarcity, right? Part of how we keep people in a functional system is perpetual scarcity. Like there's not enough time, there's not enough money, you just have to do it this way. There's not enough time to change it all right now, we just have to do it this way. And there's not enough food, so we just have to distribute it this way. Everything is scarcity based. It's a lie. So as soon as you start planting a garden or doing anything, you realize that the earth is so abundant. She just wants to grow everything we need, like so much. You're like, I just needed one head of lettuce and now I have 50, 11, you know, I wanted to grow one little tomato plant, but each tomato that falls down is like, I'm starting a new plant. Like there is just a fecund world. So part of that decolonization is also recognizing that there's more than enough of everything that we actually need. And if you want to live someplace where you have access to coconut water, you might have to move closer to where coconuts are. Like that's a different conversation too, right? Because I'm like, oh, there's no coconuts here. Like if I really want to be in that decolonial practice and get in relationship with the land, I might have to give some stuff up, but that doesn't mean I won't have enough. Right? Anyway, yeah. I like that question.
I'm glad you liked it.
I want to ask you a question that you asked in your Octavia's Parable podcast.
Oh, cool.
Which for the audience is a podcast that Adrienne Maree Brown does with Toshi Reagan, that goes through chapter by chapter, the Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, and then Parable of the Talents. And I am just loving listening to it. A question that you asked is, listening to what you just said about decolonization, how do we begin to shift, or how do we keep shifting to change the structure of our society within the context of our current structure? Can you talk about that?
Wow.
So I think there's two things that lead to mind here. The first is that we have to be willing to actually change our own practices. And I know that for years, I have been the kind of organizer who could see it all and talk about it all, and then continue being the same way, you know, mostly just being the same way, but being like, those corporations, they need to change. And so there's something, the humility to recognize like, oh, I need to change. And so I'll say like one change that's been happening for me lately, again, listening to COVID, listening to the climate, is I'm putting a travel ban on myself. And for years, you know, I have traveled. I mean, while I lived in Michigan, it was not unusual for me to be home 2 to 3 days of a month, if that. And on a plane 3 or 4 times a week from place to place. I had amazing community in all these places. I had deep relationships in all these places. But there was a mental calisthenics that was happen because I was like, I know in the future world that we need to be locally rooted and based, and we need to trust the people and trust that there are, you know, the people that are needed are in every place, and you don't have to go someplace to bring some magical something they don't have to that place. And we can figure it out. But my brain was doing this mental process of like, it basically like what I'm offering is the carbon offset for what it took for me to get there. And it just clicked. That's like, that's not enough. Like, that's not true. like there's nothing that I can say that is worth the harm that happens from that much travel. So it's also what my body is saying, right? My body is like, yeah, I'm going to get super inflamed if you get back on a plane. Like every time. I just want you to know that, right? I'm like, okay, if I am earth, which I am, then I have to listen to the earth of myself, which is telling me what the earth of earth knows. So I haven't wanted to have to face that. I have not wanted to have to face that. I have wanted to live in the world as if I could go on traveling, but if I said good things, it was enough. And so I'm this travel ban I'm sitting with, I'm talking to my coworkers, I'm talking to my speakers bureau and everybody about it. Cause I'm like, can I do this? Can I still make a living if I do this? Like, is it fair to people? Is it true? And so far everyone's like, it is, but dang, like dying, and I'm like, I'm also like, technology is allowing something. This past year and a half, I've learned like I am in some of the deepest relationships I've ever been in with people who are far away from me, but because we chose to be very intentional about the kind of time we spend together, it no longer feels like we're waiting for when we can get together in person. We are figuring out how to do it. So it's aligned with my disability justice framework, my climate framework, COVID, everything. So I think that's the first thing is looking at, for your own body, for your own life, for your own relationships, what are changes you need to make? And then the second is starting to really articulate what it is you're trying to move towards so that you can find your people, right? Because I think sometimes I see sometimes people suffering. They're like, I alone, I want this change. And then they put themselves in institutions that are like the counter to that. And then they're like, like I'm like, your life doesn't have to be misery. Like you may make a little less money or something, but you can find your people. You can find your people and you can start working with them. And I think we need to divest from the institutions that feel like shit, like I think we need to stop putting ourselves through that. I don't think we need to do that anymore. And so I tell people this all the time. I'm like, quit. Like if you really are in a space where it's like, how do I make these people change? I'm like, go create something else that is more compelling than the place you're in. If you are in an institution with other people and you're like, we secretly think this, start being louder about that, right? Like do that out loud. Your classroom should be a subversive space, whether you're a student, a teacher, administrator, like this is all, every single space that you're in can be a space of subversion, a space of teaching, a space of changing minds, a space of helping people feel themselves and like blessing that, like authenticating that, just being like, yeah, I want to tell this little thing around my partner. I'm so in love with my partner, and my partner is a first grade teacher. And so I'm getting to hear all these stories about what it's like to be a first grade teacher. And, the school system is where we start to get socialized and colonized and shaped and contorted. And one of the first ways that happens is about how kids can go to the bathroom, right? When kids can go to the bathroom and what they need to do in order to get to go to the bathroom or whatever. And it's so fascinating because now we have these pandemic babies. So the pandemic babies are like, I've literally never been in school before. I've been at my house where I had to figure out how to go to the bathroom by myself because my parents were working while also I was there. And I know how to do a lot of things, right? These kids are like, you can't tell me. I know how to go to the bathroom. I know how to go find my lunch. I can put away my own toys. You're like, I can do stuff. And the thing I always love about kids is they're like, I take my life as seriously as you take your life. However old anybody is, they're all taking their life that they're like, this is important. This is my life. I love that, right? Because I'm like, okay, these students, these are subversive. This is a first subversive generation of babies coming into schooling systems where they're like, you will not treat me like any old crap. And what my partner is hearing already is like, I'm not interested. Like, I want, it's like when she goes off script and she's like, here's, how to resolve conflicts or something. They're like, I love this. And then when it's like, here's the stuff that we're supposed to teach you, the standard you'll be tested against. They're like, I think all of us are like that, right? Is we're like, we want to learn the things that will actually help us survive. We want to build community around things we're actually interested in. And so even if we're 50, 60, 70 years old, if we're in a work environment that's like, basically you can't go pee when you need to, you can't feel what you need to feel, you're not allowed to structure it in a way that works for you, you haven't actually advanced beyond what that first grader is experiencing, right? You haven't come into the power of, that's the, what currently is the power of being an adult. It's like, I get to shape my reality. And I think we need to make everything like that. Like, I think that's what kids should get to be doing as early as possible, because they're closest to, the other realm, right? The kids come in, they're just like, I'm amazing. Everything's amazing. Well, life is amazing. I'm like, okay, let's cultivate that. Let's keep the amazingness as long as we can, instead of hiding it and trying to pretend it's not there. It amazes me how many people are miserable in their jobs and then think that they're going to build a compelling future that way. It's like, you actually have to practice joy to cultivate joy so that other people can see that there's a model for joy and move towards that. You have to practice it. And I do think that the future, I keep showing people this. I'm like literally walking around with this little Post-it note on my desk that says, capitalism makes all of life work and labor. To be an anti or post-capitalist is to make all of our lives pleasurable and playful, right? Like, it's clicking for me in a new way. And I'm just like, oh, it's the misery. The misery is the sign that we are heading in the wrong direction. So hopefully that gets at some of that.
So that was so powerful and amazing.
Well, y'all are
thank
in
you.
the same space. Now I get it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I get to be in here with them, and they're like, you could tell they like got some best friend energy going on, because they keep
So cute.
giggling
I
and
can
stuff.
see it
They're
all.
like, I'm like, I want to laugh.
It's so cute.
So we have a question in the chat box, Adrienne, from an organization that serves youth. It's called Read and Write Kalamazoo.
Yay.
And they are partnering with the Kalamazoo Public Library, the Alma Powell branch, and they're going to be introducing some high school aged youth to the Octavia through the parable of the sower. The question is, I would love to hear if you have any suggestions for approaching the story with this age group.
Ooh, I do. The first is to get a copy of this, which is the Parable of the Sower graphic novel. So it's really cool. My friends John Jennings and Damian Duffy did it. They're all getting a copy of that. Okay, great. So that's one of the first things, is to have it be the graphic novel experience versus just the writing. The second is to not infantilize the kids when it comes to the storyline, because I think people are like, oh, can they handle it? But kids these days know what's happening in the world, and there's nothing that's happening in these books that's not actually happening in the world. So that piece is just being like, okay, this is part of what's happening. And then I think having them really connect with what they would do throughout the storyline, because the lead character, Lorna Lamina, is 15, turned 16, like the first day that we meet her. And we're watching her be 16, 17, 18 years old. By 18, she's basically running an entire community space. And to keep asking themselves who they would be in the story. Do they identify as the Olamina? Could they see, do they have a worldview inside of them? What is it? How would they express it? What is it that they feel called to do? Or are they the best friend who's like, I want things to be more stable. My family and I want things to be more stable. We're not trying to get into all this. Are they the Keith? Are they feeling like super rebellious against all of this and want to go be wild? And like, to really find themselves in the story and then follow what happens to these characters. Who's able to survive? And what will they need to change or grow or shift in order to survive, right? There's really good instructions in this, like learning the nature, what grows around you, what you could eat, how you could feed yourself. There's really great instruction for like, what kind of technology is actually useful. So a lot of kids right now, and I'm guilty of this as an adult, I rely so much on my phone. And when there's a moment where like the Wi-Fi is out or something, I'm like, where do I even live? I don't even know how to get home. And so really thinking about, Do you know how to use a compass? Like, do you have a solar powered radio? Like, does your family have a solar powered radio? Like, how would you stay connected if the Wi-Fi went out? Things like that, like just really troubleshoot, like, oh, do I know how to get home and to a store and back home, right? Could I walk if I needed to walk? Who has the most physical capacity in my community? Who has the most emotional capacity in my community? You know, do I know how to be a doula? Do I know how, like, you're not too young to know these things. You're not too young to be a functional part of a community. And I think the only other thing I'd say is to really pay attention to the family dynamics and to really think about your own family dynamics. So in this book, the family dynamic is really heightened tension and fighting over like ideological differences, and then grieving each other and never having really been able to hear each other. And I think about that a lot, is like, what can you do to really love your family and not take them for granted? Even if you feel different things, even if you believe different things, is figuring out like, how can I differentiate from my parents and still stay in a good relationship with them, right? I think that's one of the great lessons of that book is, we're supposed to feel differently than our parents. We're supposed to feel differently than the generations that came before. And there's a way to love them and respect them, honor, and even protect them while we think these new thoughts. Make sure that they stay a part of your vision, you know? So those are some ideas, but I'm super excited y'all are gonna read it. I'm always jealous of people experiencing it for the first time. I'm like, I want to start. I wish I could wipe my brain clean. Start again. And there's a lot of great questions from the podcast, obviously. You feel free to grab those and use those too.
We're over here navigating who's going to ask the next question.
Oh, okay. I'll pretend I can't see that.
Yeah, for folks in the room who are joining us today, page 42 of Emergent Strategy lists the tenets of this work. And I just want to lift up Octavia Butler's quote, "God is change." I don't know, I haven't memorized the full quote, but also change. I used to say this about myself, I'm addicted to it. When I was young, my parents moved me all over. I lived a lot of different places, and I carry that tradition raising my children.
Yep.
And so I'm really okay in the space of change. I'm kind of addicted to it. It feels new, brand new, something to look forward to. Can you speak to change and maybe some folks who have trouble with change and adaptation?
I can. I think one of the things that's interesting about this is people are always like, "Oh, Adrienne, you must love change," because you talk about it all the time. And what I have found is I really like changes that I create and initiate. That's the only kind I like. And I don't like any other kind. So like yesterday I walked in, I was doing an event, and then afterwards I went back into the bedroom, and my partner, there was this plant that we moved from Detroit here, and it got super tangled, and it's like literally miles of vines. And so she just got inspired, and she's like, "I'm going to detangle this plant," which included having to like cut some of the vines and like move stuff around or whatever. And I was like, I don't like that you should have talked to me about it. I don't like that you did this, right? Now, it's the right thing to do. This poor plant is tangled. It needs detangling. It was all clumped in the wall a certain way that I had put it on there, and I thought it looked beautiful. But, you know, she was listening to the plant, and she wasn't wrong. But I was like, this is a change. And what ended up getting unveiled was I just found out a friend of mine passed after a long bout of cancer. And I was like, I don't want anything to change. Not anything else today. Like, it was like, that was enough. That finding out that he was gone was enough, and that I don't want any other change. So I want to offer that because I think that it's not like, some people are great at it, but a lot of us actually struggle with the changes that are brought to us. And what those changes mean, it's a humbling thing. It's like, you're not in charge. You're not in charge. You're not in charge. You're not in charge. The universe is trying to tell us all the time. We can shape things, we can shape change. And most of how we can do that is by shaping our own behavior, our own emotional responsiveness, our own capacity to be present. When people tell me they struggle with change, the guidance I give is practice getting present. Practice being able to actually feel as present as you can in the moment. Because a lot of times it's just like, I'm feeling upset. I feel upset about this change. The faster you can feel it, the faster you can move through that feeling and be present. Within about 5 minutes, I was like, it was the right thing to do for the plant. Like, she's clearly happier. It looks better. This is good. And it was only because I was able to be present with the fact that initially it made me upset and it connected to my grief. And so I was like, here we are. I'm in my body. And it helps to have a partner who's like, I can tell that you're upset. I thought you were going to be so excited that I was doing this. And I can feel that that's not what's happening right now. And being curious, about that. I think the other thing is to recognize that change is inevitable. And if you recognize that change is inevitable, then I think my experience is you don't take it personally as a negative thing, right? Like when stuff happens, like I locked myself out of the house without my car keys or something, it used to be like, oh, the universe hates me. It's so personal. And it's like, no, you were moving too quickly. You didn't make sure you had the keys in your hand. You automatically turned the lock. You created the conditions. The universe didn't do this one. You weren't present. You weren't paying attention. And now you're slowed down because you have to figure out how to get back in the house because you can't go anywhere. These are potentially real life examples, right? It's like, can I be present? And can I accept that like change is just happening all the time? The conditions are changing. And especially if I think I've got a routine down, change will feel disruptive to me, right? Rather than being like, oh, God has changed. And I'm trying to practice this now when I get really hard news, particularly to feel it, but also to be able to say that God has changed. God has changed. And this is beyond my comprehension, perhaps. And this may not be what I wanted. But God has changed. And so this change is also divine. There's a divinity to it. That's how I know that life is still unfolding because things are changing. And when they're not changing anymore, like that'll mean that I'm dead or something's dead. And, I don't want to make assumptions about what that's like either, but I've been getting a strong sense lately that I don't know if I'll be able to say this correctly, but that everything is actually all right. And my friend Alta Starr, she said that to me a few years ago, everything's actually all right. And I was like, no, and I started listing just the things that had happened that day. And I was like, these are all wrong. This is all wrong. Like, we're supposed to be doing this so differently. And she was like, what we can't comprehend doesn't mean that it's wrong. Like, we think that living here is the best thing that ever happened, but we don't know. The ancestral realm might be the most popping environment, and it might be like so fucking great when you come to there and you're like, oh, no more arthritis. Now I get to be like a being of light, like, doing some new experiments or whatever. It's just like, you can't assume, you can't comprehend, you don't get to know, you only get to know what's happening here. And she's like, what if everything is all right? Like, if these challenges are the ones that unlock the next level, if these pressures are the ones that form the pearl, if this pain is the way that we learn our humanity, the things, the people that I grieve for have made me such a better human, right? Like, I used to take people for granted. Like, I just don't. When I find out that people have died, like, I found out my friend Richard passed away, Richard Wright. He's a DJ and an organizer and a good man, like a really, really, really excellent human being. And I feel no regret. You know, like I feel like we did a good job of being in a relationship with each other in this lifetime. He knew that I loved and respected him. Like we collaborated where we needed to collaborate. We had boundaries or we needed to have boundaries. So it's like it's God has changed. Like that was his whole life. And I'm sad about it. I'm grieving about it. And I'm also like in right relationship with it because I was in right relationship with him. And I feel that way. There's no one in my life that I love who doesn't know how much I love them. And if I die right now, or if they die right now, we know. And that feels really important to me. It feels really important to me that I don't think I would have learned that without the losses that I've experienced in my life, how precious each day, each interaction is. And COVID heightened this. You know, I really started interacting with people like this might be it, because there's a disease in the world. And if you catch it, you can be gone in a few days. And I love you, you know, and I love you. And you may or may not wear a mask like I want you to. I love you, and you may or may not get vaccinated like I want you to. And I don't want my last thought of you to be my anger with you for not doing things the way I wanted you to, because you're choosing your own journey. And, you know, I'm working on that. I'm working on that all the time, right? Like it's easier to feel that way when people are a little bit more distant. It's harder to feel that way with the closest ones to me. But I'm working on that, right? Is to be like, I want to be in right relationship with you because I'm not in charge. You know.
There's so much goodness coming from this. I am not in charge. Let me take a minute to articulate my thoughts because they're what I'm hearing and what I want to lift up is this the how to be what you're speaking to right now. And maybe this is not possible. Maybe it's possible. I'm a possibilist. I think it's possible. As an institution, how to, like, if we considered the institution not being in charge and paying attention. And I actually heard you talk in that moment about relinquishment, which I asked in my original questions, like the idea of like, what does it look like to give up in a good way, or let go maybe is a better word, so that the world can be the way that we as an institution are looking for. And I think because my imagination, my really big idealistic imagination is that we can come together as a city of like people and leaders who are trying to do good work. Yeah. And think about like, I'm going to give this and you're going to give this, and we're going to talk about how to build the space we think we should be living in. And none of us are in charge. How do we humanize our institutions in a way that allows us to do that? It's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And it's also like, sometimes I think of myself, like when I'm facilitating, I think of myself as the breakup goddess or the breakup coach or the sunset coach, or, you know, the one who's just like, it might be done, you know, like we have to consider that it might be done. And I read this piece years ago. There's a book called The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. And there's this essay in it by Paula Rojas called Are the Cops in Our Heads or in Our Hearts? But she talks about how movements form and then unform in Latin American movements, right? And she talks about how she's like, one of the things we learned from watching these Latin American revolutionary movements is that there's not such a attachment to institution. It's more like an attachment to the ideas and the change process. And so we form the structures that we need for that time, but then that changes. And so we let go of the structure, but we keep the relationships and the networks. And I think that feels really important right now, almost at like a Buddhist level of non-attachment. It's just like, how do we build the things that will serve us as long as they work and as long as like they're necessary, and with a soft hand, right? Like it's like we're building it to be in relationship to us currently. And we always have that sense that it might not last forever. I think this one's hard because the mode of philanthropy and capitalism is really like institution build, like build the structure and then make it, fortify it, like just make it stronger and bigger and bigger and stronger, bigger, stronger. And I think the truth of our nature, our human structures is infrastructures and institutions are relevant only as long as they're actually in service to the community that they're a part of. And the community has to let you know, is this still functional? In my dream for like shifting philanthropy, shifting how a lot of things come into being, it's community directed rather than philanthropy directed. So, community would actually be the ones who would be like, okay, here's what we need to spend our funds on. And philanthropy, if any role that they played at all would be like, we are investing in Michigan, we're investing in North Carolina, we're investing in, this region or whatever. But then local regional leaders would be the ones who'd be like, okay, here's where it needs to go. This is where that energy needs to go. When in doubt, asking the community, right? Like really being able to come back to the community and say, were we of use this year? How could we be of more use next year? And listening for those answers, and trying to find the relationship between what a community is telling you that they need and what you can actually provide and what brings joy. That's the sweet spot, right? It's like, what's needed, what do you actually know how to do, and what brings you joy to do. And if one of those pieces is missing, you'll be out of alignment with yourself or with the community, right? Because you can do what they need and what you're good at. And if you're not joyful, the joy, not being joyful will suck all the life out of the offer. And the community will feel that, they can tell when you're like doing something out of obligation. Yeah, so we can all feel that, right? So I think that's the piece is checking in, being in a process with community where you're just like, still good, still useful. And where appropriate, making that conversation very tangible, like these are the resources that go towards this thing. And does that feel like the thing that we need those resources for? Which I think is uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable, like to talk about how much it costs to run an institution and how much people actually understand about resources and budgets and stuff like that. But I think this is part of that moving towards a cooperative economic is being able to say that. Like in Detroit, there's a beautiful example of folks who are like, we need trash picked up. We need trash picked up, that, and we need recycling picked up. Like, otherwise it's not going to happen. And that's not the sexy work. That's not the fun work. It's not the glamorous work, but it was what the community was like, this is what we would actually need. I want to recommend Alicia Garza's book, The Purpose of Power. I think it does a really good job of kind of talking about organizing, like that kind of organizing where you're actually in service to a community that's larger than yourself. But I think that's the biggest piece, is like, if you think of the institution as something that is living and breathing, then it's easier to understand that it has a timeline at which it's at its peak aliveness, and then it might go beyond that. I think we all know of organizations that are trying to subsist in zombie form, and it generally is not good. It's generally sucking the life out of the living. So, yeah.
You guys on mute. Hi. So I have a question.
Okay.
Thinking about this institutional decolonizing and those kind of things. Generally in these traditional workspaces, right, with hierarchy and I didn't build it, but I work here, right? And
Yeah.
so how do you get that movement going for decentralization in these kind of larger organizations?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one thing that can be difficult is that people come into a space that is structured hierarchically, and then they're like, we need to flatten this. And I think you have to have, like, coming into it, that needs to be a conversation, is like, would there ever be an opening to shifting the structure, shifting how power works here? That's one thing. And then once you're in it, I think having an honest conversation with people about that. And if that's not a match, if people are like, we're not ever going to do that, ever, right? Then really take that in, it's like that Maya Angelou, like when someone tells you who they are, believe them, and find some place that is structured that way or is interested in that. I think a lot of pain happens because people come into structures and they're like, this sucks, I'm going to change it. And no one there is actually committed to that changing. I also think that pay attention to how things actually work, not just what's on paper. And so if the way things actually work is that the work is pretty shared, like sometimes you have a really great leader or great ED or great co-directorship or whatever, and actually things are really shared. Some hierarchy can be good. And I think even in nature, we see that, where it's like the more the elders or the more experienced or whatever hold a different kind of responsibility. And that can actually be good. What you don't want to end up with is there's some positionality that's not aligned with how things are actually playing out. The more honest people can be about how work actually happens, the better off you'll be at trying to get a structure that is an honest reflection of how things actually happen, right? So some places to look at are decision-making and how work gets done. And what I find is a lot of times when people are pushing for the change, they want to change how decision-making happens, but they don't necessarily want to take on more of the shared load of the responsibility, right? And no one ever wants to say that. But when I was the ED, I was like, I had so much to say before I was an executive director about you need to do this and you need to do that. And like, you just don't even know what you're doing. And then when I became an executive director, I was like, everyone needs to shut up because I have to figure out how to make healthcare happen for people. And no one taught me how to do that. I need to make sure that everyone has enough money for a salary. And that number feels outrageous to me. It takes like 3 years to even learn what the hell you're doing in most leadership positions. And it's a heavy load. Again, Linda, right? Linda's over here like, oh my God, I can't believe I signed up for this job. And I thought it was leadership and I thought I was being honored, but actually it's a shit show. Anyway, I might be going too much truth, but like that's the reality of what's happening. And I think that the more people actually understand, like, here's what it takes to hold the work. Who wants to hold the work together? That's an exciting conversation, right? And instead of just, and I've seen this tear apart so many different groups where people were like, we want to have a decision-making role that doesn't align with actually showing up and doing more work or taking on more labor, right? Now, I think that this is internalized patriarchy. So it shows up, it's how patriarchy shows up, even if we're like, but I'm not patriarchal. I couldn't be, I have breasts or something. It's like, no. Patriarchy is available to everyone. Everyone can practice it because it's a way of relinquishing responsibility for work while wanting power, while wanting, the power over decision-making. And anyone can get into that, because it feels great. It's like, I'll just sit here and tell you what to do and you'll do it. It feels great, at least initially, unless you're empathetic and tuned into the person who's doing the work, right? If you can feel yourself, then you can feel Linda, And I think in an organizational structure, you want to be like, can we feel it ourselves? Can we feel that work is actually being shared equitably? One other thing was popping up over here, like, ooh, what is that? Oh, also in a structure, everyone's different. And I think we don't acknowledge that. So we try to share things equitably by sharing it equally, which is not always true, right? Some people, like, I always laugh because I'm like, I can do more work in an hour than most people can do in 3 days. And if I pretend that that's not true, then I'll just have a very frustrating 3 days trying to either slow down or, I don't know, just contort in some way. But that doesn't mean I want to do 90 days of work in 3 days. If that makes, I can't do math, obviously, but you see what I'm saying, right? It doesn't mean I want to then hyper load that capacity. But what I do in my organization, they know that about me. So they're like, Adrienne, here's the things, like when it's organizational time, here's the stuff to do. And who knows when it might happen, but sometimes I'll just wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I'll spend 3 hours and I'll knock out all this work, right? And since they know that about me, there's no putting it in relationship to how other people work, because I'm like, maybe I could get more done if my pace was slower and steadier, but that's just not how I'm structured, right? I am a done. Now I need to go off and think about books or whatever, right? So letting each person actually be the way they are. There's some people who work really fast. There's some people who work really slow. Give tasks that are appropriate to those different ways of working. There's some people who are extroverted and like can do a lot of the relationship. Those people should be managing, right? Helping people talk and managing in the way where it's just like supporting, helping people talk through their issues and be in relationship and how to be in a relationship, right? And then there's other people who are like, I'm super introverted. It's like, good, give them roles that don't require a ton of, like, please, I can't, right? Like, I just want to sit in my house quietly and do my work. So all of that plays, like, I'm like, structure is only well served by being humans inside of it.
So, okay, realizing that we're almost to time, and it's my responsibility and duty to always highlight youth program quality that says we have an extra 10 minutes to still be high quality. So the question that is popping up is, how do we support ourselves in movement and connecting in the role of pleasure and joy? Can you give more about that?
I mean, I think the first thing is to name to each other your pleasures and joys, like make a list in your structures, in your organization, in your meeting, go around and have everyone say some of the things that bring them pleasure and joy. Let people know, like with my coworkers, I'm like, here's gifts that I would always like to receive. Like, you literally cannot give me too many candles, too many, incense and things to burn, like too many bar soaps of different smells. Like, I'm just like, I will forever be open to that, receiving that. It always gives me pleasure. And I know the answer for that for the people that I work with and I'm around. I know who likes flowers. I know who likes plants. I know who likes a poem, So sharing those things with each other, building in a culture of celebration is important. And you can figure out what are the things you want to celebrate. It might be birthdays. It might be anniversaries. It might be like, you finally got divorced from that jerk, yeah, it's like we're holding a party, right? You might just want to do a monthly, like, we made it, we're still here party, like facing our mortality with celebration party, celebration of the lives of those you've lost, but really creating a culture of bringing joy and celebration into the organization. There might be a way that you honor each other each week. Again, my partner is doing this cute thing where she has a turtle scholar of the week, and they get to hold a stuffed turtle and take a picture. But the other students get to vote on this. Who did you see change the most this week? And then they vote on it. And it's just adorable. And I'm like, I don't think we're ever too old to be like turtle scholars of the week somewhere, and even in a small group, just figuring out like, what are you changing and what are you feeling good about?
Thank you. I want to circle it back around to just, I think what you're doing is you've taken, so our Climate Crisis Coalition group in Kalamazoo just read the Ministry for the Future. Have you read that book by Robinson? I'm terrible with that. Yes. Ministry for the Future.
No, but I'll write it down.
Folks are calling it a transitional utopia. And I think it's similar. It does the same thing to me in a different way as Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, where it offers some ways to think about how we are going to imagine our future together. And I think your work is laying that out for us, or providing a guide for us, or a pathway for us to gather together and talk about and discuss how to do that. Based on these utopian sci-fi novels that give us something to look towards instead of the thing we don't want to see. I be patient with me. It's here. It's here. And I want us to think. I want our community to think about that. Where are we headed together as we think about reconstituting our world, and how does this work? Emergent strategy help us understand how to shape our world. And thank you so much for being with us to talk to us about that and answer our questions about that. Thank you so much. And then I want to highlight Carly Thompson, who is our Nature Center staff, who has been the person who has brought us, like helped do all of the things that brought us together to make this possible, from communicating with all of the partners and setting up all the logistics in the background to make this happen. And talk to me about, help me articulate what we want from this. So thank you, Carly. And thank you, Adrienne Marie Brown, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, y'all. It's been a pleasure. I'm sending you love. I know you can do it. Trust yourselves. And hugging you. I miss Michigan, so hugging you. I'm gonna run,
Thank
but
you.
I'm gonna roll. Thank y'all.
Blessings. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Should we just?
Thank you all. We're going to give a minute. We recognize some people are sharing out their experience in the chat. So we want to just create space if there's something you'd like to share as we wind down today. Carly mentioned you'll be receiving a resource list with what was mentioned, and just thank you.
Hey all, this is Carly, and I also want to say that we really want to provide a nature, can you hear me? Okay, we want to provide a nature experience for people who participate in any of our programs, and we recognize that that's something that's missing from virtual events. So also something that I will put on that email, but I also just want to tell you that if you registered, your name will be on a list that is going to be at our welcome station at the front gate. And you all have free admission, one-time free admission that comes with your attendance today. So please come out to the Nature Center and tap into the healing, the inspiration that comes from a walk in the woods. And if you didn't register, you can, I'll put my email in the chat and then you can send me your name.
Thank you. And then there's some questions about whether or not this video will be shareable. It will at some point be shareable it is recorded, and it will share it on our collective YouTube spaces. So one place will have it and the Nature Center will put it up.
We can too.
And Rooted will put it up as well. So you'll be able to find it. And then I'll encourage you to go find Adrienne Marie Brown's books, either from the library or from This Is a Bookstore, buy from your local bookstore. And do you have anything to add?
No.
No. And there, Reagan, thank you, Reagan, has been sharing resources all the way along. And if you have questions about the work of that we're doing, any of us, please send them along to one place or the Nature Center or Rooted, and we can all be found on our website. So I won't spend a lot of time trying to list those things, but please reach out and ask us questions or tell us what you think. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here with us today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just want to also share that to join us for the rest of the events that are in a part of the Community Emergent series, we have a deeper dive book discussion next week. One Place is hosting out here at the barn. And so there are several other, there's a drumming, I believe, activity. That was last week, I'm sorry, maybe. But Jenny's got some more to share. Go ahead.
There's so many buttons to push. Okay, so events that are still coming are, yeah, mute me, okay. Events that are still coming are, there's a wellness and healing together session on gun violence with Rooted. The deeper dive discussion that Stacy just highlighted for us that One Place is hosting here at the Nature Center. It'll cover the book. Rock, Read and Write Kalamazoo is doing lunch with Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower at the library. There is a Transforming Our Approach to Conflict by Griffin Place. There is our Natural Connections writing workshop that is also hosted by Rock. That is for 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And then another one of those same workshops that's for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd graders. And then there'll be a few more popping up that you'll find on our Nature Center website. All of those can be found on our Nature Center website under the Community Emergent series and heading. And then look for more that are coming that are intentionally set up for you to give us input on what we should do next. We want this program to turn into actionable things that our community wants to see happen. So join us for those discussions if this feels like something that is for you. Thank you.
Mhm.
And perhaps is it time to let go of the Zoom unless anyone has any other needs from us at this moment. We're really grateful for you all to be here today. And also just, can we give kudos to our facilitators for those of us that are still on, but just the phenomenal job Jenny, Kama, and Stacy did. And with that, take care of yourselves. Have a good one.
Thank you.